If the USS Abraham Lincoln is really fine, as Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth insists, then why is the US Navy preparing to send another aircraft carrier into the Middle East? Hegseth has dismissed reports of deteriorating conditions aboard the Lincoln as completely misrepresented. But the bigger story now is not simply what is happening aboard one carrier. It is why the Pentagon needs to rotate another carrier into a region where the US Navy is already under enormous operational pressure. The ship being moved is the USS George Washington, a carrier that has been operating in the Pacific and is now heading toward the Middle East to replace the Lincoln. And that distinction matters. The move was reportedly planned before the latest controversy over conditions aboard the Lincoln emerged. So this is not a case of the Pentagon suddenly sending a rescue ship. But it does reveal how the Iran war is forcing Washington to shift major naval assets between theaters. Because the Lincoln has already been pushed far beyond a conventional deployment cycle. The carrier left San Diego in November 2025 and was later redirected to the Middle East. According to Senator Richard Blumenthal, it had been deployed for more than 250 days and had gone more than 200 days without a port call, setting a record for consecutive days at sea. And now, instead of simply ending the carrier presence in the region, another carrier is being brought in. That is where the real problem begins. The United States is not only fighting a war in Iran, it is trying to maintain a global military presence at the same time. The George Washington's move toward the Middle East means pulling a major carrier away from the Pacific, potentially creating a temporary gap in a region where Washington is also trying to deter China and reassure allies such as Japan and the Philippines. In other words, pressure in Iran can now have consequences thousands of miles away in the Indo-Pacific. And the concern goes beyond where America's carriers are deployed today. Senator Blumenthal is asking whether the Navy can actually sustain this tempo over the long term, without damaging maintenance schedules, fleet readiness, or its ability to respond to another crisis. His letter asks whether the current demand for carrier presence is already greater than what the Navy can sustainably generate under its existing force structure. And that is a much bigger question than whether the Lincoln's living conditions have been misrepresented. Because every carrier sent to the Middle East has to come from somewhere, and every carrier kept at sea for months eventually needs maintenance, rest, and a replacement. The USS Gerald R. Ford has already demonstrated how long these deployments can stretch, spending 326 days at sea before returning home earlier this year. So the real test for the Pentagon is not simply whether the USS Abraham Lincoln can keep fighting. It is whether America can keep feeding carriers into the Iran war without stretching its global naval power too thin.